2013's massively overlooked Batman cartoon, Beware the Batman, was notable for how the creative team went out of their way to focus on lesser-known Batman villains. Characters like Professor Pig, Magpie, and Anarchy were the headline foes in favour of rogues like the Joker, Catwoman, and the Riddler. I totally see where they were coming from. Batman arguably has the best rogues gallery out of all of the comic book superheroes, and maybe even the largest. Yet most on-screen adaptations tend to focus on the same heavy hitters. However, for as great as Batman's rogues are, not all of them are particularly compelling, so they require a bit of tinkering before they could carry a whole episode of a cartoon. Take for instance, Cypher. For years, I had assumed that Cypher was an original character made for Beware the Batman, but it turns out he isn't. He's a radical reinvention of an extremely obscure Batman villain that has only appeared in 4 comics, and 2 of them were issues of Robin solo series, so you could argue that he's a Robin villain more than anything else. The comic book version of Cypher, notably called The Cypher, first appeared in a 2-part story in Detective Comics issue 657 and 658, published in February of 1993. This story is only really notable because it's the last story to take place before the massive Nightfall crossover that saw Bane break Batman's back. He was a nondescript man named Avery Toomby who used subliminal messages hidden inside of music tracks coupled with his compelling voice to conduct corporate espionage. He targeted the CEOs of 3 companies that had been awarded contracts from the government to work on a super secret project. So secret that the 3 companies didn't even know what they were working on or that they were collaborating. Each company produced a segment of the same project, and when the 3's work was combined it would become a powerful device. The government was concerned about security at a single company and felt that breaking it up into 3 separate projects that they could later combine was the best way to ensure its secrecy. However, the Cypher targeted the CEOs of the companies in order to piece together what they were working on. He posed as a repairman to hide his subliminal music in the offices of his targets, to get his hooks into them, and then coax their secrets from them. In order to bring them under his control, he would have them relive their childhoods and play on their insecurities before compelling them to kill themselves to keep his involvement secret. One of the companies in question was Wayne Enterprises, and the Cypher targeted Lucius Fox. Fortunately, Batman, Robin and Azrael were on the case. The Cypher was no physical threat to them. Robin took him out with a swift kick to the throat, and once his music stopped, Fox was free from his influence. The story ended with the Cypher being carted off to jail, unable to speak properly thanks to his injury. His next and final appearance came in the pages of Robin number 1 and 2, where we see the Cypher has made some Z-list friends in prison, including the Electrocutioner, Zonk and the Clue Master. During their group session, the quartet team up using the Cypher's power of persuasion to escape from prison. But just because they were pals in prison, that doesn't mean they were friends. Cypher made the mistake of trying to take control of the group, but the Clue Master had prepared for that possibility by stuffing their ears with cotton buds. Now that they couldn't trust the Cypher anymore, Clue Master simply shot him and left his corpse floating in excrement, which is a very undignified end. Given his generic appearance, not particularly exciting powers that he used to persuade people to commit suicide, I can completely see why the character was changed for his appearance in Beware the Batman. Remember, this was a cartoon intended for children. As I said earlier, this was a show that prided itself on mining the deepest, darkest recesses of Batman villainy to find characters to use instead of the more popular rogues. This was one of the show's biggest strengths, and its weakness. Much like their version of Professor Pig, who in the comic books is a deranged surgeon striving for physical perfection in all of his patients, their Cypher was radically different. The first thing to note is that his design makes him seem like some sort of creepy insect-like cyborg, climbing along walls with 6 eye holes in his mask. He seems to be incapable of speech and can only speak through his victims, and their voice comes through with a robotic filter, which is kind of ironic given that the comic book version's powers of persuasion came through his voice. Batman initially mistakes him for a robot, but Cypher is quick to note that he is human, or was at some point, but is now a cybernetically enhanced man. He had neon green tendrils that came out of his palms and connected to the person at the base of their skulls, and these allowed him to assume full control of them, essentially making them his puppets. Cypher spends much of his time spying on his targets, sneaking around in air vents, waiting to strike, which gives him a very creepy vibe overall. It's ironic that for as powerful as he is, he's generally very weak and can't really do much for himself. Cypher's abilities are clearly a huge violation of the victim's mind, but the effect is short-lived. During his first on-screen appearance, Cypher hijacks architect William Benjamin, who looks a lot like the Cypher by the way, to gain access to the schematics for Dr. Jason Burr's lab. Once Cypher has what he needs, he lets Benjamin go, who, we're told, recovers a few hours later. Cypher only has control for as long as he is connected to his victims, but notes that if the connection is forcibly broken, it will fry the victim's mind. Batman took Cypher at his word, but it's not entirely true. Note that when Batman is taken under Cypher's control, he is able to break the connection himself through sheer force of will. But when Cypher's connection to Jason Burr was prematurely cut, it changed Jason. Perhaps the distinction here is that the victim has to at least partially break the mental connection before the tendrils can be severed. Speaking of Jason Burr, he's quite an interesting character. While in Beware the Batman, he's an awkward scientist working on the ion cortex, a machine that was intended to put a stop to the world's energy supply problem, and is awkwardly besotted with katana. In the comic books, he was the twin brother of the evil leader of the cult Cobra, Jeffrey Burr. Initially, Jason had a psychic connection with his twin brother. When one felt pain, the other also felt it, but they were on opposite sides of the law. Jeffrey eventually killed Jason, but Jason was later resurrected to become the new leader of Cobra, but that's an entirely separate matter unrelated to this video. Here, Jason winds up with a connection to Cypher that turns him evil, as indicated by his glowing green eyes. This is, of course, a direct reference to Cypher's influence, but also a nod to the comic book Jason and his connection to the snake-worshipping cult Cobra, who were very big on the colour green. It's also worth noting that when Cypher connects to his victims, he feels all of the things that they do. So when Katana kisses Jason, it causes feedback that distracts Cypher long enough for Batman to knock him out, freeing Jason. The noteworthy thing here is that there's an audible snapping sound when the tendril disconnects, as if it was forcibly removed rather than just released, and that may be what corrupted Jason. So it's interesting that they took the initial idea of Jason's psychic connection to his evil twin brother from the comics and instead reframed it as the influence of Cypher. Cypher had been working for the League of Assassins, and that is what leads to Jason joining the group, betraying Batman. Jason steals the ion cortex, blowing up his lab with Batman, Katana and Alfred still inside, and hands the device over to the League. This device was key in Ra's al Ghul's plan to take over Gotham City. With Ra's in control of their power supply, they would have to give in to his demands. But when Katana once again broke Cypher's influence by kissing Jason, their celebration is short-lived, as Lady Shiva drains Jason's soul with the Soul Taker sword. Jason isn't seen again in the show even after all of the souls are released from the sword, so it's pretty safe to assume that he was killed in this confrontation. Cypher, meanwhile, has been sitting in Blackgate Penitentiary alongside many of the other fantastical foes. Jason says he felt like there was someone in his mind pushing him to do bad things, so it's safe to say that Cypher was operating through Jason while incarcerated. Once Ra's drains all the power from Gotham City, he heads to Blackgate to free the superpowered villains, telling them that whoever brings him Batman will be given their own area of Gotham to rule. The funny thing here is that if these villains had pooled their efforts, they could easily have defeated Batman, but they're incapable of being anything other than selfish brutes. Cypher can't resist taking control of Magpie and Phosphorus Rex, demonstrating how weak he really is. He can't do anything on his own. Batman plays to their incompatibility by setting all of the villains against each other, and Cypher is last seen getting launched off-screen by a fiery blast from Phosphorus Rex, which was a little undignified. Overall, Cypher isn't the most significant villain in Beware the Batman, which is fitting considering how insignificant the comic book original was. However, the creative team gave him a complete redesign, almost to the point that he's an entirely original character. Rather than someone that persuades others, he has direct control like a creepy puppet master that is pretty much powerless on his own. It's also interesting to note that many of Beware the Batman's villains were animal-themed, Professor Pig, Magpie, Tobias Whale, etc. While Cypher is technology-based, it's a subtle difference that makes him stand out from the crowd. Cypher may not have left a legacy of chaos or carved his name into Gotham's skyline, but his reimagining in Beware the Batman is proof that even the most obscure villains can be transformed into something memorable. He's less a character and more a concept, a whisper in the mind, a glitch in the brain's defenses, a symbol of manipulation taken to a parasitic extreme. The original Cypher convinced you to do terrible things. This one simply makes you do them. And that shift from subtlety to brutality is arguably one of Beware the Batman's strengths. There's a kind of ironic poetry in how Cypher operates, a man whose only strength is control, but he is utterly dependent on others. This is his defining trait, as well as the cause of his downfall. So, yes, Cypher might not be one of the greats, but I really appreciate how the show took a villain left afloat in comic book sewage and turned him into a mind-controlling cyber phantom who almost brought down Gotham. If that's not a glow-up, I don't know what is. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send $1 or $2 my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time, I'll be back on Friday when it will officially be Superman Day, so I can talk about The Last Son of Krypton, the 3-part opening story from Superman the Animated Series, and why it is a perfect origin story. Then next Monday it's time for my final Creature Commandos video, where I'm going to talk about the lovesick man-baby Eric Frankenstein, and how he should not be confused with the Frankenstein's monster of DC Comics. Hope to see you then.